This is Inside PHLCouncil, bringing you the latest news from Philadelphia City Council, straight from the source. Inside PHLCouncil is hosted by Joe Grace and Patty Gillett.
Hi, I'm Joe Grace, City Council's Communications Director.
And I'm Patty Gillett, Council's Deputy Communications Director. Welcome back to Inside PHLCouncil.
Patty, it's the end of term podcast for us. We're going to recap today the last two sessions at Council over the past couple Thursdays as Council ran to the wire and ended a pretty productive term. What a whirlwind. Guns, a home guns check initiative that challenged people to show personal responsibility in turning guns they knew shouldn't be in their homes. Tax abatements. First time in 20 years, change is coming to the abatement. Change on homestead exemptions for homeowners, too. Plastic bags. They're going to be gone soon from Philly stores, hopefully from our streets. Bed bugs. We hope they'll be gone, too. Council weighed in on that. Last but not least, 4 retiring members and some pretty emotional moments in Council and some singing, too. Where in the world do you want to start?
Let's start with guns. It's a very important issue, has been since we started this podcast. Let's look at the stats first. More than 1,300 shootings in 2019 so far, including over 340 homicides. Significantly, at least 108 people under the age of 18 have been shot this year alone. These are children fatally shot in their homes.
Horrible.
Council had seen enough, and it acted with a home gun check initiative led by Council President Clark, with a huge assist from community anti-violence advocates and faith leaders and the Philly Police, including an appearance from the Philly Police Commissioner, acting Police Commissioner herself. The home gun check initiative took place over 2 recent Saturdays at 4 church locations in the city. It's a simple premise. People know where their guns are. If they're in their home or their residences and they shouldn't be there, they should turn the guns in, no questions asked. And these 4 locations were the place where you could safely and confidentially drop off a gun in the hopes of saving a life.
Really interesting.
It started a little slow as we recap the last 2 weekends. 6 guns turned in the first weekend, although 2 of those 6 guns were loaded. So that's significant. Those are, kind of situations that we may have averted there.
Absolutely.
But last weekend, it stepped up a little. 18 guns were turned in, including a semi-automatic assault rifle. So pretty scary stuff. And so it's 24 guns total over 2 weekends at just 4 locations. And we want to thank all of the elected officials and the people who helped us get the word out very quickly on these events. We didn't really give people a lot of notice, but people really stepped up and helped us get the word out on that. I'm
so glad you said that. I know we got a lot of other things to cover, and if I miss anybody, you chime in quickly. But Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson, Councilmember Curtis Jones, State Representative Joanna McClinton.
She was great. She was
others promoting this. Bilal Qayyum, we have to say his name. Promoting this on social media. It got on local television, I get that, but the word got out. And we're going to have a lot more under Council President Clark and the other council members' leadership to say about this early in the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to, definitely have plans to keep doing this.
We totally need to do it. I'm glad we just hit that. Tax abatements has to be next, right? Did it actually finally happen?
Absolutely, it did. It's the first reform of any kind in the 20-year history of Philadelphia's real estate tax abatement. It did pass unanimously, but not without some last-minute twists.
Tell us about it.
The bill that passed uses a phased-down approach that will reduce the abatement for residential new construction by 10% annual increments over the next decade. This significant change to the abatement will not impact abatements on commercial properties or rehabilitations of existing residences in our neighborhoods. Council thinks both of those abatements are still important and worth keeping because they generate jobs and help stabilize the neighborhoods. Now, Council President Clark said the change in the abatement can be expected to generate anywhere from $275 million to $300 million over the next decade in additional tax revenues, which will go directly towards the school district and to other badly needed city services.
That's real money.
That's real money. The plot twist on this, and the last minute twist that we talked about, comes into when the reform is actually going to take effect. Council had proposed a date in mid-2020, which is only 6 months away.
Right.
Mayor Kenney threatened to veto the bill in that form under pressure. He was under pressure from the building industry and some of the trade unions,
right.
And they argued that they needed until mid-2021 to implement the reform properly. So what did we do? We do what happens in government. We compromised. They met in the middle, and the reform will go into effect on December 31st, 2020, which is next year.
It really sounds reasonable, and I'm glad you just said the council president, I think, in a press scrum a couple of days ago said, we did what we do in government to get something done. We compromised. We governed. And sometimes people don't understand that, but that's what this council really does. And it got a significant reform through. Hey, they also increased the homestead exemption, I hear. Take a minute. Tell us what that is.
Okay, the homestead exemption increases from $45,000 to $50,000, up $5,000. This will benefit 220,000 homeowners in Philadelphia who are facing rising property assessments and higher taxes, which in some neighborhoods is fueled by gentrification. So these are reforms that if they're signed by the mayor, can really have an impact on individuals' property taxes looking ahead.
Forgive me, I'm sorry. No Those are really significant reforms. Now, this all happened at the end of the term. That's a lot to get done.
Absolutely. And it wasn't all council got done. We had plastic bag reforms done as well after 4 tries. I think this is the 4th try. We had that.
I believe that's right.
We had this conversation with Councilmember Squila about how many times this has been tried in council. But after a decade of trying and failing to get a plastic bag ban through council, Councilman Mark Squila moved through legislation that will prohibit most plastic bags from stores and not impose any fee on paper bags. That was a compromise too, because his original bill wanted to have a fee because environmentalists feel that a fee on paper bags helps with the effectiveness on the bill.
Right.
We had some pushback from some of the members who feel that adding a fee is regressive. So the bill passed without a fee. But what's important is this bill that passed also has a study component. So we will be studying what we're doing, and we do what council and councils all over the country do with legislation. They revise it. So if we learn more after the implementation of this plastic bag ban, we can go back and revise the bill. But Councilmember Squila was adamant he really wanted to get this bill on the books before the end of this term.
He really deserves credit, and quickly, he deserves, I think, a little more credit. So plastic bags, they're going to be gone. Tell us about the other passion of Councilman Squila and what he got done.
Bed bugs, his other passion. So starting with this bill that he had some legislation on bed bugs. This legislation that passed and will likely be signed by the mayor and implemented, landlords will be required to pay for the removal for bed bug remediation up to 1 year into a new lease. And landlords and tenants will split the cost after a year. Not everyone was happy here. Advocates for tenants thought it didn't go far enough, that landlords should have to pay deeper into a lease.
Right.
Councilmember Squila worked hard and tried to find common ground and ultimately got a bill that was able to be passed. Again, we can look at this bill and see if it needs to be revised going forward. But again, like the plastic bag ban, this was a bill that was a long time coming.
He doesn't get a lot of headlines, but he's quietly very effective. And these were 2 big issues, and he really worked them.
2 big issues to handle simultaneously.
Right.
And not a lot of times that you see a member work on just one piece of legislation,
Yep.
In a term and really passionate about
Right.
be passionate about it and get it done. He was working on 2 things simultaneously, which is really difficult for him and his staff.
He's also got a really good staff, and you beat me to it. Let me start off the last segment, and then you can close it out. 4 members attended their final sessions of council over the last couple of weeks. Council members Bill Greenlee, Blondell Reynolds Brown, Janie Blackwell, and Al Talbenberger. They all attended their final sessions, ending decades cumulatively of service in this council. Those final sessions were really something, weren't they? The long speech from Councilwoman Reynolds Brown on December 5th, and the joint speeches by the other 3 members on December 12th, their final day. The council president put something out about the members, didn't he? Tell us about it.
Yes, he did. He sent a message to all of council, and it was actually copied to the press, and it's on the website as well, just saying something individually about each of the 4 members who is leaving council at the end of this term. He knows them well, and he wanted to acknowledge some of the work that they have done specifically. So I'm going to go one by one and read.
Please.
some of the things that he said. So about Councilmember Janie Blackwell, it's been here a long time, synonymous with the 3rd District. He said, Janie's advocacy for marginalized and vulnerable populations in the 1970s laid the groundwork for much of the advocacy work being done in our city today. She has an incredible legacy, working with the homeless, working with immigrant populations.
She's really going to be missed.
She's going to be missed, and it was very emotional in council when she had her final words.
It sure was.
Moving on to Councilmember Bill Greenlee, Council President wrote, a progressive leader who focused on results over headlines, Bill led the 7-year fight for Philadelphia's paid sick leave law and sponsored or co-sponsored other landmark progressive legislation, including wage theft, Fair Work Week, the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, and last spring's ban on cashless retail. And like we've always said, the low-key member, quiet member of council who you always turn to when you needed a question answered.
A little bit. You said that from when I first returned here, and I saw the truth of what you have said. A little bit of the conscience of this council.
Yes. And on Councilmember Blondell Reynolds Brown, again, significant, one of the only woman in council leadership, which was significant. This is what the council president had to say about her. Blondell has made tangible, far-reaching improvements in the ways the city of Philadelphia provides supplementary funding to public schools, manages its parks and recreation facilities, protects children from lead poisoning, minimizes its impact on the environment, and so much more. We're going to hear some more from Blondell in a few minutes because she is our council person of the week, who will be talking about her and her legacy in a few minutes, but wanted to put that out there.
Really looking forward to it.
Okay, and finally, Councilmember Al Taubenberger. Now, in comparison to some of the other council members who are leaving, he served for a relatively short period of time as a council member, but people forget he was also a staffer here for a long time. So when he came in 2016, he really did hit the ground running because he knew how this place worked.
Right.
And this is what the council president had to say. During his time in council, Al sponsored legislation to help small businesses better plan for their local tax expenses, help expand the Philadelphia's hate crime code, assist small businesses in investing in energy retrofits, and increase payouts to families of fallen and first responders. And he also added this: it's hard to imagine a person being prouder to be a member of Philadelphia City Council than Al Taubenberger was. And I think you and I have seen that. Al is just a happy guy to be in this building.
I don't think he'd mind. It's my last contribution here on this near end of your podcast. Me sharing that you and I went up to meet with him a couple days after he was defeated. And he got emotional.
Yeah.
Just in private, talking about what it meant to him to serve the people of Philadelphia and serve in this council. I wish everybody could have saw that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people who don't know the real Al Taubenberger, and that's a shame.
Mm-hmm. Patty, those were really nice excerpts from Council President Clark. I'm really glad that you just read them. What's next? What do we do now?
What are we doing now is behind the scenes inside PHL Council. We are preparing for inauguration on January 6th, 2020. And the next session of council. So there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes. So the next time you will hear from Joe and myself, we will be bringing you sounds up from the Met Philadelphia and City Hall on Inauguration Day. We're going to run around and record some of those great moments in audio so we can bring them to you. What we're doing that day is we're swearing in 17 members of City Council alongside the mayor, the Register of Wills, the Philadelphia Sheriff, and members of the judiciary. And as many of you know, that is taking place at the Met Philadelphia on North Broad Street. And then we're going to come back down to City Hall for a party.
Patty, I can't wait to do that. And on behalf of us, the Inside PHL Council team, just to everyone out there, whatever the holiday is that you're celebrating, we wish you the best of holidays with your family, with your friends, and stay safe and enjoy. And we can't wait to see you. We can't wait to see you and broadcast for you early in the new year.
Absolutely. And I would say for everybody to check out phlcouncil.com. There's a lot of changes going on the website as we incorporate our new members, make some exciting improvements to the site. And the next time you visit the site, you'll see something new. And check out the weekly report. We should have a weekly report out to you before inauguration, so check it out.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great holiday.
Hey, thank you.
Like what you're hearing? Be sure to subscribe to Inside PHL Council on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome back to Inside PHL Council. Again, I'm Joe Grace, our Communications Director.
I'm Patty Gillett, City Council's Deputy Communications Director. Welcome, Councilmember Blondell Reynolds Brown. How are you today?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the first for me, so I'm excited to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's not our first podcast, but we are excited to have you here. We wanted to get you before you unfortunately left us. So we're going to go back in our little time machine, and we're going to go back to when you first ran for office 25 years ago. By your own account, you were working in Harrisburg as a legislative staffer, and you saw the distinct absence of women, especially women of color, at decision-making tables. So you decided to run for office. Ultimately, you were successful and won an at-large seat on council at a time when very few women had won citywide office. So what do younger voters today need to know about what it was like running as an African-American woman in the late 90s, early 2000s?
Thank you again. That's exactly right. I was awestruck, stunned, and unhappy about being at tables in the state Senate where there were few people who looked like me and only 2 women. So I learned then, and it still exists now, that you have to be prepared. You have to show up with a heart that is authentic about wanting to make a difference in the corner of the world that you occupy, and then proper planning will always prevent a poor performance. So if you don't understand what preparation looks like, this is not the world for you.
Yeah, and I've heard you say that before, proper planning, and it's something a lot of us have to follow because you do need to be prepared, and when you're not, it seems like you get dinged twice.
You do, and preparation comes in many forms. You have to be prepared from a fundraising standpoint, being ready to endure the arduous, uncomfortable, inconvenient task of fundraising. You have to have a war chest. You have to be prepared in terms of issues that gnaw at your gut, issues that exist, complex issues that exist, and what you want to do about them. And you have to be prepared from a personal standpoint, because having a family or people who care about you, whose arms will wrap around you, that's part of the preparation as well.
Absolutely, the support network that you mentioned in your speech to council last week.
Yes.
Fast forward to 2019, Philadelphia's at-large candidate field was more diverse than ever, and in this council that's coming in 2020, there will be 3 African-American at-large council members joining the council. 2 of them are women. While that's encouraging at the municipal level, what do you think needs to happen for us to see some of that at the state level and at the federal level?
Well, yay that we now have 3 who's showing up January 1, 2020. And we have every reason to be optimistic and encouraged when we look at 2018 and what happened. A record-breaking number of 103 women were elected or re-elected to the United States House of Representatives. Women still only make up 23.7% of Congress. Here's the good news. When I ran in 2019, Pennsylvania got a D+ for women who were in elected office. Right now, we're a C+. On a national level, there's been a great shift. And so we have more models and more examples of what can happen at the municipal level. And so in that way, we should really be encouraged. Diversity has to be a very intentional, directed, strategic enterprise.
Absolutely, and you're well known for speaking to department heads, CEOs alike, and asking them for their plan about making sure that their workforces look like the populations that they serve. I think that was a line that I mentioned the other day. Did you want to add something, Joe?
I wanted to chime in something quickly because your answers are so succinct, and thank you, Council Member. So you started as a staffer in the state legislature, and you just gave us a good view of what just happened in Congress in 2018. I've been around Harrisburg a little bit, as have you. Do you think there's enough diversity happening in terms of elective office in Harrisburg, in our state legislature?
My answer would be yes, because for this reason. Where you have urban pockets, you have a greater representation of, you have greater diversity. Philadelphia is a T state. We have Pennsylvania is a T state. You have Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, with oftentimes it was said Alabama in the middle. Yes. And so that harsh reality means that We'll never have the diversity in the state legislature that we would want, but as long as we have urban pockets adequately represented at the state level, we should be encouraged.
Okay, no, that's it. Again, speaking of the new council members, as many people know, one of the new at-large members is your former staffer, Catherine Gilmore Richardson. She's publicly credited you as her mentor, and she's one of several former staffers who've moved on to different kinds of government and policy work after they've left your office. Talk to us about what you've termed about the importance of building a deep bench. Is that a responsibility you believe comes with your role as a public official?
Yes, yes, yes. That's a role that comes with any of us who want to be a leader. It speaks to who we are if we are serious about elevating and growing the next generation of leadership. It speaks to who we are if we are serious about wanting to teach and train. And I will say that that philosophy really stems from me being the oldest of 7 in my family. It really stems from me, as some of the listening audience might know, of my mom losing her husband at 37. I was 16, oldest of 7. And so my mother, some might say burden, others would say grace me or bless me with the responsibility that you have to look out for everybody behind you. And I believe that teaching as a teenager has really carried me throughout my career, because there is great value when you can have a group of young people who are anxious and energetic and want to work hard and want to be a part of the process. Because ultimately that's what this is all about. We're not going to be around forever. And shame on us if we don't build a bench, which means teach young people, encourage young people, motivate young people, pull on young people, engage young people around the process. And that takes work. It really does take work. So when I'm approached by young people at events and they say, I want to get involved, not to worry. Give me your name, number, and email, and someone from my team will follow up with you.
Well,
that's where it starts. People just saying, I want to help, I want to be involved.
Well, that's a great segue, because my next question was, what advice would you give a young person who wants to get into this field, who's looking for a mentor? Mm-hmm. How would you suggest they connect with somebody? Okay,
so it's easier said than done, and it's a two-way street. Being a mentee and acting in the role as a mentee is two different things. So what's the how of that? There may be persons that you read about in the paper, folks that visit your school, persons that you see in your church, or whatever organization you're a member of that really pull at your heartstrings. And so it's important to do exactly what Catherine Gilmore Richardson did. She wrote me a note. She wrote me a note as an 11th grader, and I wrote her back. Then we didn't have email, right? So
that's a great story.
So I wrote her back, and we started communicating by just writing notes. And I'm a note writer anyhow. And so when she went on to Westchester University, we stayed in touch with each other. And she graduated, got her master's degree. Then she either called me or I was at an event, and she says, I want to be a volunteer. Really? Elected officials love volunteers.
Yes, we do.
And so her volunteerism, while she is now building a career, took place. And then she said, well, I want to be an intern. We love interns too. And that's where she got a chance to see government even more up close and personal. And so what happens in situations like that? I tell young people who say they want to work on a campaign, the way you capture the attention of elected officials is you volunteer. And it doesn't mean you volunteer just because. You volunteer excellently, consistently, all the time. I know because that's what worked for me. I wasn't just a volunteer, I was outstanding. Now, I'm not bragging, but because I did little things well, I was assigned more and more tasks to do big things well. And that's really how you grow and build success. And so volunteering is where you can capture the eye of someone who inspires you. Volunteering is where you can say to someone, I want to be more in your space zone.
And if there's one constant, you're right about city government, is if you do something well, you will get more work.
No doubt. And that's a good thing.
That's absolutely. And your story echoes something that Maria, Councilman Sanchez, said about her entree into city government, which was
Councilwoman Tasco.
Councilwoman Tasco, and Councilwoman Tasco said to her, "You have a lot of opinions. You should come work for me."
I got to echo. I was smiling. Our listeners can't see this, but as the councilwoman was talking about volunteers, and candidates love volunteers. And I know we're not supposed to talk politics, but we're having a great interview here with Councilmember Reynolds Brown. As a former campaign manager, I was smiling because the thing I love the most, campaign managers like volunteers even more than candidates, because they come in and then you're looking to see who can do it.
Yes.
Can you do it?
Yeah, can you do it well?
You hit every point. That's why I was smiling. Can you do it well?
Yes.
Will you show up? Do you have a good attitude?
Yes.
Will you come back? You hit every point. That's why I was smiling so much. You got a lot of wisdom about all this.
Thank you, Joe.
Why? That's from the heart. Let me switch gears a little bit.
Please.
From politics, which will make Patty nervous that we're talking politics, in Inside PHLCouncil, to policy and some highlights from your career. Let's talk for a few minutes about the Fund for Children.
Yes.
Now, some of our listeners might be a little too young to remember that this was born out of all the stadium negotiations.
Indeed.
And that it requires Philadelphia's professional sports teams to pay into a fund benefiting city youth for 30 years. Now, in 2019 and beyond, there's still an ongoing need for cities like Philadelphia to negotiate with sports teams and large companies like Amazon. What do you think elected officials today and in the future can learn from your participation in negotiations around the Fund for Children?
That is a great question. It's a terrific question.
Patty gets the credit.
Okay, because yes, those are parallel opportunities. The negotiation of the stadiums, 2000, and the still hoped for negotiation of Amazon when they find the wisdom to circle back to Philadelphia.
Yes, they better.
And so, homework is always important. And what do I mean by that? First, look to see what other cities have done. First, look to see what lessons are learned from cities who successfully negotiated with Amazon. Right. I knew that best practices matter, and in 2000, it was San Francisco who had successfully negotiated a deal with their football team where they actually negotiated $1 per ticket for children. And I tried that as a newbie, and the owners of the leaders and the owners and leaders of the Phillies and the Eagles said, "No way, not a problem. This is a negotiation." So I had a kitchen cabinet of professional women who believed like me that we needed to do something for children. And out of those weekly meetings, we came up, well, what about $1 million per team per year? So then I met with my two coaches, Mayor John Street and George Burrell, because they were going to be my emissaries, if you will, with the shuttle and diplomacy going back and forth with the Eagles and Phillies. Yep. And they bought that idea, $1 million per team per year for 30 years. So now, fast forward to 2020. What is it in our city that we need more of? Let's figure out what that is, and as we negotiate with Amazon when they find the wisdom to come back to Philadelphia, let's put that on the table, because no one should get a free ride, because we're going to bring enormous assets and opportunities for Amazon. Let's, as a city, as thinkers around President Clark's table, figure out what matters to the 17 members, reduce that to a hit list, and as we think about offering Amazon tax breaks, Amazon needs to think about looking at what's on our checklist.
So that's incredibly, that was really helpful. Before we move on to the next topic, take another minute. Tell our listeners, 30 years, $1 million per team, per year. How has that benefited children? Take a minute and tell us about that.
Please. Well, I learned and knew always that if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And so while I was thrilled about the legislation, I wanted in writing how those dollars should be spent.
Right.
So in the body of the legislation today, it says that those dollars must be spent on early childhood education, arts and culture programming, athletic programming, parenting workshops, and after-school programming. So an asthma association, with all due respect to those who suffer from that, cannot apply for those dollars.
Yes.
And that fund is now 15 years old, so there $30 have been put in that fund, and it grows at the Philadelphia Foundation. We have 15 more years to collect $1 million each from the Phillies and the Eagles. Those dollars must be spent on children programming, and because I know if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist, I've actually asked for reports periodically from the Philadelphia Foundation showing me where precisely those dollars are going.
That's such a good story. It got a lot of attention at the time. My sense is it doesn't get much attention at all. And Patty's agreeing.
I
and
agree.
So are you.
I agree.
These days.
I
15
agree.
years in, 15 years to go.
I agree.
Here's the money in. Here's where it's going.
I agree, and we've
It's a
had
story
conversations
we need to figure out a way to tell.
to let it percolate, because it's not being utilized, in my personal point of view, to the magnitude that it should and could, given the challenges facing our children in our city. I mean, if you just think about this issue here,
Totally agree.
and how children are being impacted by that, there may be an opportunity there for President Clark to have a conversation with the leadership at the Philadelphia Foundation. So I agree 2,000%. It is not promoted to the scale that it should be and could be, given the volume of the dollars that get dumped into that fund every year.
It's an extraordinary story.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking a few minutes to talk about that.
Thank you.
Let me move on with you to something a little more recent and very near and dear to your heart and your policy. You spent most of this year updating the city's law on lead certification in rental properties. Yes. Now, to be clear for our listeners, this is updating laws that you wrote 11 years ago on lead paint.
Yes.
So you've been a leader for that long. Even with your prior knowledge on this issue and 2 decades worth of work in City Council, was there anything about getting this lead certification and abatement legislation drafted and approved that surprised you?
Yes, it was hard. It was hard to find the delicate balance between solutions that would begin to mitigate our children still being poisoned by lead and protecting small landlords who many are trying to make a living so they can feed their families. And so working with at least 24 stakeholders were at that July 23rd meeting of this past summer, we had to seek the delicate balance because we discovered 2 things in the 2011 law. One, the unintended consequence that families with children were being discriminated against. So the human relations, the role of the human relations became involved. And 2, simply the law was unenforceable. And so, again, we looked at best practices. We discovered, my staff and I, that there was going to be a national lead conference in Washington, D.C. So we went down to that conference where you had policy wonks from across the country, many of whom have figured out how to deal with the lead issue. And so what that tells me and others as a policy person is sometimes you have to step out of your cocoon and go to where the experts are, so you can really learn. And we went to Baltimore, the city of Baltimore, Maryland, and spoke up close and personal with professionals there who had dealt well with the lead issue. And my attitude is, if you can have smart people in Baltimore or Rochester, New York, which was another city we talked to,
yes,
then we got smart people in Philadelphia. We need to figure this out. So it was hard. It took an unlimited number of meetings, and I am one who prides myself, and I try to help my staff and others understand, let's look for the win-win. Let's look for the and not the or. We don't want winners and losers here because that's unproductive. And after a gazillion meetings, we found a win-win and ultimately ended up with a 17-0 vote, unheard of.
You know, there's so many people that in the years ahead may benefit from that, your stick-to-itiveness on this issue, 11 years.
Yes.
And then everything you did this year, and you wonder whether they will understand that that it was your role, along with your staff.
Of course.
That made this happen. You really should be commended for
Thank
what you
you
did
for that.
on lead paint abatement.
It was
It's
very
such
hard.
a critical public health issue.
That's what it is, a public health issue, and shame on us when we have the tools right within our reach, and we don't use those tools to save children whose lives are damaged forever when they are poisoned by lead. So we ended up, not everyone is going to be exceedingly happy, and that's the business we're in. But as long as we can move the needle, and everybody has a role in moving that needle, then that's the value of the process.
Extremely well said. So we have a few minutes left in this very dynamic interview. When you announced your decision earlier this year to not run for re-election, you said, and I quote, "I can still make a difference, but I do not have to be elected to do that," quote. What's 2020 going to look like for Blondell Reynolds Brown?
Well, I won't have to work 9 days a week anymore. I'm ready to work 7 days a week, and maybe even possibly 5. But the city never sleeps, so I won't have to work 9 anymore.
No.
That was a very compelling part of my decision. And secondly, when you have major events in your life, like I lost my mother 28 months ago, my daughter graduated from college, then it was time for me to take stock for this 4th chapter, or 4th act, or 4th quarter if you love football.
This is a football town.
So I'll be able to spend more time feeding my passion of wanting to write children's books. I've fully written one. I haven't had the time to find an illustrator because of this work in Philadelphia City Council. I haven't had time to look for a publisher because that's a whole nother track of engagement. I've been to the International Book Fair for the last 5 years, and I leave there so filled and yet so sad because I knew that I had to come back to this work. So I'll be able to finish a few books and get them published. How about that? While I continue to work in some other space and still make a small difference for whatever that organization or entity is going to be about. So I'll be working, continuing to make a dent, but I'll also be able to feed my passion, and I'm going to begin taking dance classes again. How about that? I haven't done that in 20 years.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because she's all about dance. But I don't think Joe knows this, but every year we have a presentation in council about the African American Children's Book Fair.
That's right.
In February. Because it takes place at CCP. There's a chance we might see Blondell back here for the presentation at the African American Children's Book Fair, but as an author and not as a councilwoman.
That's my dream.
There you go.
That's my dream.
I want to have a rare moment of disagreement with my good friend, Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown. She said she was going to try to make a small difference somehow moving forward. I don't think anything you ever do, said respectfully and with feeling, is small. And we are really going to miss you in this chamber, but you sure are not going to. It's so obvious that you are not going to disappear from the public stage. And we can't wait to see, genuinely, whether it's children's books, dance classes. I loved hearing that. Whatever it is, we genuinely can't wait to see it.
Thank you both. Thank you both.
Councilwoman.
Happy holidays.
Visit our website, phlcouncil.com, where you can subscribe to this show, get contact information for each council office, learn more about our legislation, and find dates for upcoming hearings and meetings. Follow us on social media. We're PHL Council on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Inside PHL Council is produced by Philadelphia City Council. This episode is adjourned to the call of the next upload. Thanks for listening.